round of applause, Mr. Seiler.
Burke. That's John.
I'm John.
Sounds like there's a little volume difference there. Is there? Can you hear me through the speakers? Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, well, did y'all ever have a day like that? Well, cultural communication challenges, something like that? That's what we're going to talk about. You know, it's, I'm sure you all have had it. I know I have. Colleagues, employees. Okay, well, as you know, I'm Burke Fort. John Metzger. We're here to tell you a little bit about the business of Space 2.0, accelerating the next generation of technology ventures. What is Space 2.0 and why should you care? Space 2.0 is the convention that we have coined to try to distinguish ourselves from what you are more familiar with and what we call Space 1.0. So, have you heard of these guys? Household names, particularly in this area. Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed, Honeywell, United Launch Alliance, Northrop, Ball.
Their only customer is the government for the most part.
This is Space 1.0. Space 1.0 is astronauts and rocket scientists, rocket ships, trillion-dollar government projects, at least in the mind of most people. Okay, anybody recognize any of these names? They're all local. It is now. Microsat was bought by Sierra Nevada a while ago. So was Starsys, then Space Dev, then Sierra Nevada, a lot of changes. Okay, well, these are all organizations, smaller companies. Let's call them Space 1.5. Space 1.5 is characterized as people and companies building specialized subsystems for astronauts, rocket scientists, rocket ships, and trillion-dollar government projects. This is new space. Let's take a look at a couple of those anyway. SpaceX, you may have read about them in the paper here lately. They make rockets, they make space capsules. This company's owned by Elon Musk. That's why they're able to accomplish so much so quickly. Elon Musk has invested his substantial net worth in standing up this company and is actually accelerating the process of developing launch systems, both for cargo and for astronauts, at a pace actually quite a bit quicker than NASA. Okay?
This is a guy that started, I believe it was PayPal and yet another company. And then he also just announced the Tesla, the first electric car now being commercialized. This guy is competing as an individual entrepreneur directly with Lockheed Martin.
Okay, this is a little harder to see, but you all have heard of Sir Richard Branson, the Virgin Atlantic. He's got Virgin Galactic. You may recall a couple of years ago, a fellow won the X Prize Foundation, a guy named Burt Rutan, by successfully launching a human being above 62 miles, which is the legal boundary of space, brought him back alive and then launched him again within 2 weeks to win the X Prize Cup. With that, he attracted a great deal of attention, including from Sir Richard Branson. Again, with Richard Branson's deep pockets, developed this aircraft, which will hold a larger spacecraft that will fly tourists up above 62 miles, 100 kilometers, to give them an idea of the darkness of space, the curvature of the Earth. Again, a commercial enterprise. Okay, and speaking of the X Prize, the fellow who started the X Prize is a fellow named Peter Diamandis, who also, prior to that, started an outfit called the International Space University, which is headquartered in Strasbourg. And then started the Zero Gravity Corporation, where you can actually buy a ticket for about $5,000 and get on a 727 that's FAA certificated and fly in zero gravity. Again, through deep pockets of individuals. This particular company has been doing quite well and recently was sold to Space Adventures, which is an even larger space tourism company. Again, new space.
Space tourism sounds a little far-fetched, but in the last 5 years, it's increased by orders of magnitude. It's actually becoming a viable industry.
All it takes is money, but the price point is coming down, actually. $5,000 to experience zero gravity actually is worth it. I've experienced it on his airplane as well as the NASA airplane, something that you want to do if you can. Finally, Bigelow Aerospace came from Bob Bigelow, who made his money on motel and hotel chains, and then reinvested it in his dream of having the first hotel on orbit. This is a little hard to see, but this structure here is actually on orbit now. It's a half-scale version of the full scale that he wants to put up there, and actually was technology that was developed initially in the 1990s by NASA for the space station, called an inflatable habitation module, where you could actually compress a habitation module, stick it within the fairing, the payload fairing of a standard rocket, take it out into space, expand it, then it hardens within the radiation environment out there and creates a volume that you can then pressurize and put people in. He's doing that as well with his own private funds. Okay, how about these guys? Any names look familiar up there? A couple of them should. Digital Globe's right here in Longmont. Digital Globe is a company that provides spatial imagery. And by spatial imagery, I'm talking about photos of the Earth from orbit, or as it also turns out too, from aerial platforms. They provide it for two different types of customers. They provide it for the intelligence community, and this is stuff we can't see, we don't have access to. And then the stuff we can see, we find mixed with geographic information system, location-based information, and then it finds its way to my iPod, which is over here, but it's in a handheld device. Do you have yours?
I have a prop. Okay,
the iPhone with GPS and overlaying on aerial maps and space maps.
We did some initial public relations when Digital Globe launched their first satellite, and our headline to the Wall Street Journal was "Spy photographs for the masses," or spy photographs now come of age or become legal, and now they're on everybody's iPhone. So it's kind of a short little trip to where we've come today. Lumidyne
is the winner, and I'll explain the program in a minute, of our first University Business Plan competition. Lumidyne took technology actually out of CU, new accelerometer technology. And by the way, if you don't know what an accelerometer is, you're an accelerometer. Every time you step on the gas in your car and you lean back because of the momentum throws you back in the back of the seat, or if you slam on the brakes, you go forward. That measures acceleration and deceleration. Accelerometer has a variety of different uses. Space uses, if you want to steer any kind of spacecraft, you got to have several of those on board. But they also have other uses. When miniaturized, you can sprinkle them on tall buildings or in bridges and monitor structural integrity. People in Minneapolis would have liked to have had that on their bridges a couple of years ago. You can also use it to characterize subsurface geological formations like oil fields with much higher resolution and a lower price point than the traditional technology they use today called geophones. They're a startup and they use space technology. All of these did. Flake, first tenant in our business incubator. I'll explain about that in a minute. Flake comes to us from Australia. You have a little device. If you go up to, what is it, Keista or Copper and Steamboat and Copper, Winter Park, you get one of these if you go in the ski school, so you don't get lost because it's GPS and cell phone technology that's connected back to the ski school so that they don't lose students.
Ski areas have been using this technology for a long time, except it's mostly been RFID radio frequency identification based, and now it's GPS based, which is much more accurate.
Yeah,
So
don't lose nearly as many that way. iShoe. iShoe is an insole developed at a team from Harvard and MIT from astronaut training devices that NASA developed. You know, when you're out on space for a long time in 0G, you kind of lose your bearings once you get back in 1G. And you tend to, not walk very well. Well, this device actually senses problems, very nuanced problems in the sole of your foot, and helps astronauts walk again. iShoe is taking that technology and selling it to baby boomers who have parents who are getting on in age, 70s, 80s, 90s, having a hard time standing with balance problems, to kind of see a problem before it results in a fall. I can go on. You've heard of Google Earth and maps. You've probably used them. Pyramid Sciences has developed an ion spray technology that's good not only as a propulsion system on orbit, but also to do high-definition etching of semiconductor materials. Beacon Biotechnology, right out here in Fitzsimmons, has a little device about the size of one of your memory sticks that's able to characterize viruses and bacteria, again, based on space technology developed for astronauts in long-duration space flight at a price point an order of magnitude less than current technology. They were on the TV about a week ago. Perhaps you caught them on the news. Finally, Guigné is an outfit that's associated with the Colorado School of Mines, and I'm pleased to say that the School of Mines in Guigné just launched the first commercial laboratory to go on the International Space Station. What does that lab do? It makes ultra pure materials, ceramics, bone material, things of that sort, in the zero gravity of orbit, materials that you could not make down here in 1G, then brings them back down for our benefit.
they're pretty cool, and they make up for that hard to pronounce name. So
let's call this Space 2.0. Space 2.0 delivers content through venture-backed businesses from space-derived technologies to global commercial markets. Don't see the government mentioned in there anywhere. They can be a customer, but you don't see big government grants mentioned in there either. You see the venture-backed, the capital markets at work. This is the taking of the technologies out into the global marketplace. And that's what distinguishes it from everything else. I'll give you a couple more examples. Every time you go out to pump gas at the 7-Eleven, you pull out your credit card if you're paying with credit, and you put it in and pull it out quickly, and some company who owns a bandwidth on a telecommunications satellite takes your information and bounces it off of a satellite to, say, New York City, and where it says, yeah, John Metzger pays his credit card bill, let him pump gas, and then the signal comes back, bounces off telecommunications satellite to that pump right there at the 7-Eleven, and the pump says, okay, lift the handle and start pumping gas. That's Space 2.0. Not particularly sexy, but space is involved. Chemotherapy. In zero gravity, experiments have been done that indicate that chemotherapy stays in cancer cells longer in zero gravity than it does in 1G of Earth. And that's led to a number of interesting developments in chemotherapy. Another space-related development having to do with cancer is, back in the 1990s, there was a study that was done that resulted in using spacecraft's heating and cooling systems. The heating systems would actually heat the cells that they wanted to direct the chemotherapy to, and the cooling system would actually cool the cells that they didn't want to direct the chemotherapy to. The result is less hair loss, more chemotherapy in the cancerous cells. Space 2.0. Navigation and location-based services. I think a lot of us all have GPS, or at least know how to use it, and probably doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. GPS satellites, again, come to us from the government, but they let us use a certain portion of it to a certain resolution for non-military, non-intelligence purposes. National security. bridges the gap, emergency response. Unmanned aerial vehicles that you see in the war scenes are also patrolling our borders or over disaster areas, locating people on rooftops, along with cell phone technology, saving lives. And then something as innocuous as an ear thermometer. The latest ones, probably several of you have it, were developed from the same sort of sensor technology that are being used in some of the best telescopes in the world to track the furthest stars and galaxies. Okay, so let's talk about the rest of the story here. All this probably isn't much of a surprise to you because over the years, NASA's done a great job at letting you all, the American taxpayer, know, all the different ways that its technologies can benefit life here on Earth. But they've missed a couple of things. And this is what we're concentrating on with the Eighth Continent Project. It creates jobs and regional prosperity. The recent, decades worth of surveys that NASA has done have indicated that support for the space program is very broad and only an inch deep. And it's because they have, I would say, made the mistake, but not taken the argument far enough to connect it with everyday people that might not have been benefited by the latest chemotherapy or an ear thermometer or any of these things that we've just mentioned. So making it personal. It's shovel ready, it's creating jobs and regional prosperity, even in today's economic situation, and there are shovels in the ground in terms of job retention. I think perhaps you may have read, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, where Colorado now has eclipsed Texas in terms of the number of aerospace jobs per capita. This does not include the military jobs down the road a piece, but just simply private employment. And it's not just rocket science. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, an aerospace engineer to be able to work, to benefit, to gain as a breadwinner or as a community by these technologies. Okay, so let's recap a little bit. We've got the continuum: Space 1.0, Space 1.5, New Space, and Space 2.0. Here are the differences and the similarities. Space 1.0 are systems integrators. They take all the subsystems and they integrate them into sophisticated satellites and spacecraft for various missions and various purposes. And they also do space operations. This is your Lockheed, your Grumman, your Boeing, your Ball. Okay, then your broad reach engineering, your microsat, they actually build the subsystems that the Lockheeds and the Balls kludge together into the systems. It's still very much space-oriented. Space is an end sort of a thing. Finally, new spaces, space is an end as well. It's just funded by a different source of resources, usually wealthy individuals. There are a few exceptions to this, but principally up to this point, it's the Elon Musks and the Sir Richard Bransons of the world.
And we haven't had individuals funding new companies like this on this scale since probably the early 1900s with railroad barons, J.P. Morgan, steel companies, energy companies, and so forth. So this level of entrepreneurship is quite significant and different.
And then finally, Space 2.0 is really different. It's mass market oriented, providing content, okay? Not providing space systems, but providing valuable content to mass markets, much like GPS, much like cell phones, much like space imagery.
And their customers are millions of people, not just a few people like governments or other defense contractors.
Billions of people.
Billions.
Billions and billions and billions. Space 1.0, let's look at it a different way. Typical venture type, typical funding source, typical business model. Aerospace companies and technologies are the typical venture type in Space 1.0, and they're principally funded by governments who are the customers. Typical business models, cost plus, and it's governed by a very extensive set of rules that you don't particularly see out in the private marketplace. In the United States, governed by the rules and regulations of the White House Office of Management and Budget.
Cost plus means that they get to charge back for the cost of doing business and add a little bit of profit to it, but it's very controlled.
And that also is, allows for cost overruns too, but they still make their profit margin because that plus is their fee unless there's a penalty after a certain point. You don't hear about that in the private capital markets. What you have in Space 2.0 is much more like the capital markets. Terrestrial ventures derived from aerospace technologies is what we're talking about, not necessarily space systems themselves. Funding comes from just any kind of startup or any kind of early stage or growing company. You fund it yourself, but that's usually modest if you're not an Elon Musk. And then you enter into angel and eventually institutional venture capital funding. So debt financing as well as equity financing is the typical pattern for Space 2.0 companies. And finally, it's fixed price. You have your price points out in the market. You don't have a situation where it's what it costs you and then, they'll pay you whatever it did cost and then you get to take a little bit, on the top as a fee. Doesn't work.
Venture capitalists really hate to invest in cost-plus business model companies.
Okay, take a breath. Are you with me so far? You kind of see the difference between the two? Okay. Let's move ahead then. Okay, so what's the Eighth Continent Project, and again, why should you care? Let me explain a little bit about what we're all about at the School of Mines. The Eighth Continent Project spans everything from Space 1.0 to Space 2.0, including Space 1.5 and New Space, but concentrating on Space 2.0 because it's the most underdeveloped of the four areas. It serves an entire ecosystem. I'll explain to you in a moment that we have a whole menu of programs that we have stood up at the School of Mines in the Eighth Continent Project that serves the emerging commercial sector that is Space 2.0 in a comprehensive way. And it's all under one roof. Our principal components are a Chamber of Commerce, and I've already mentioned the business incubator. There's a university business plan competition, which by the way is global. We have a funding network and a research program. So you're starting to see the comprehensive element. Okay, where we are, I said a moment ago, Space 1.0 is space as an end. You do it in and of itself for the value of going into space and doing things in space. Where Space 2.0, space is a means, it's a tool by which to deliver content and value to markets.
American taxpayers paid trillions of dollars over our lifetimes. Probably the first part of it was mostly defense was the goal, and then it became more space exploration with the Apollo project and so forth.
And this is the dividend on that investment. But like our friends, Darmok and Gillard at Tanagra, there have been some cultural challenges along the way. Let's explore a couple of those. The giggle factor. Still, when you walk into a angel or VC's office and you start talking about this great idea and you want that person to invest in that great idea, you say the word space, unfortunately 9 times out of 10, there's this giggle factor. Oh yeah, space. Okay, let me see. How many trillions of dollars do you want? And what kind of return on investment will I get over how many decades, if any? That's kind of the thought. Well, that's outmoded thinking now in Space 2.0. And by the way, I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't know how to speak NASA speak. Okay, we're trying to overcome that. And from the other direction, the control junkie factor. We've got a bunch of people in Space 1.0 and Space 1.5 and even New Space who are still kind of used to and were brought up on this government-funded model. And so they know the OMB regulations, but they really don't know anything about equity financing or debt financing or anything of that sort. They're comfortable with the government and the relationships they've made there, but they have some pretty good ideas which, if given the right talent and the right funding and the right timing, could make money and economic prosperity for communities far beyond anything possible with simply government funding. But they don't want to give up control of their company. And of course, that's something that kind of plagues virtually every startup at one point or another. The question we ask is, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? At any rate, that's further down the road. So how we got here, just a little bit of background. Space 1.0 started with World War II. And out of it came naval research labs, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and that sort of thing. And that was really the start of government funding. That's when the investment began. So, 6 decades. NASA's 50 years old, so there's been 5 decades worth of investment there. Interesting about Sputnik, a lot of you are not old enough to remember Sputnik. I am, and I can remember, the terror that it brought upon us as a nation and the free world when the Soviets actually got to orbit first was something. It was very intimidating. There was no place to hide. But you know how they were able to do it? This is kind of a little known fact. They made a mathematical error. They were able to, everybody was trying to create launch systems to lob nuclear warheads at one another. And they didn't have a nuclear warhead yet, so their best scientists actually tried to calculate what kind of size, what kind of weight payload did they have to throw in order to deliver a nuclear payload across the other side of the world. They made a mathematical error by an order of 10. So immediately their rocket scientists started developing these really huge rockets, and the United States, which knew how big a warhead was, created rockets that launched only 1/10 of that. And as a result, the Russians actually got a capability on a mistake that got them Sputnik and also got them Yuri Gagarin up first before we did, because we were building rockets that were the appropriate size. So, there's a lots of mistakes and quirks in the road. One of them that I happen to think is a quirk is the right stuff. How many of you remember or have read the Tom Wolfe? Okay, you remember what that's all about. Again, I'm old enough to remember, a lot of you probably aren't, but I'm old enough to remember back in the 60s, we knew all 7 astronauts, the first astronauts, and all 4 Beatles by the first name, okay? It was part of the pop culture. And so it was really ingrained at the time in how we viewed ourselves as Americans, and actually it extended out to the world, because as we approached the moon, it was something we all were a part of it, almost a very visceral, but certainly a very personal level. But it also created the wrong stuff. After that, there are people that I've spoken with in NASA who are secretly glad that they canceled the last 3 Apollo missions. Why? Because that Saturn V rocket was seriously dangerous, okay? And they didn't want to kill anybody. And they were very lucky that there had been only the few casualties up to that point before they got to the moon. The other thing about it was that kind of ingrained itself in NASA and in the agency. And I've spoken with people who were active at that time in leadership roles, and they have said, we do not want people to know who our astronauts are. We don't want them to know their faces. We don't want them to know our names. So going from being a pop culture icon, the astronaut went into being kind of a fungible commodity. Nobody knew them. And that was because NASA was afraid that, because it was very dangerous, somebody was going to get killed, and they didn't want it to be somebody that the American people loved. So that was the right stuff in one sense. You can understand their thinking, but it was the wrong stuff because it served to separate us from the space program, something we felt very close to back in the 60s and early 70s that we now feel very
We think
divorced
this was a
from.
public relations error on behalf of NASA.
It could have been, and perhaps suggests why still to this day support for NASA is broad but only an inch deep, because none of us really feel there. It's rocket scientists, it's astronauts, they're up on that pedestal. It's not me. Well, actually it is through Space 2.0, because you can have jobs, you can have prosperity in your community through the technology that's come as a dividend from that investment. So, of course, rocket science is a silo, right? It's a vertical, and we've kind of seen other verticals, I think in other areas. Computers and intellectual property like computers and IT, information technology, at one time were the province of highly educated computer scientists and computer engineers, okay? But look what's happened since the 1960s. Computers are ubiquitous. They're in virtually every part of our lives. Some places we don't even know that they are. can tell you that aerospace is becoming that way too, an aerospace-derived technology. From silos of the astronauts and rocket scientists and the traditional Space 1.0 image to synergies. It's cross-cutting today in all of these different areas. You can read for yourself. How is it in sustainability and clean energy, for example? If you've got a space station up there, you've got to keep people alive in it, and it's very expensive to lift things off the surface of the Earth. You've got to make some very exquisite, nuanced, and productive systems for gathering, storing, and managing power. That is now helping the folks down the road here at NREL and other places here in Colorado in the new energy economy bring less expensive, smaller carbon footprint technology to every one of us. Take another one. We've already talked about GPS and GIS and telecommunications, biomedical, nanotechnology. Nano, the most expensive thing about space, doing anything in space, is getting it out of the Earth's gravity well. It takes huge rockets just to lift, everyday things up there. So there's quite a premium attached to them. As a result, technologists have been able to shrink things, reduce their power requirements, and increase their productivity in the process, help giving you nanotechnology. I could go on and on and on, but there are just many, many different ways, even today.
There's a lot of miniaturization in the iPhone, as a matter of fact, that came from the space book.
Exactly. Typical Space 2.0 venture is a typical startup or early stage venture now. It looks a whole lot like what angels and VCs were looking at and still are looking at in terms of the latest web app or something of that sort. Less than $750,000 to start up, producing at least 5 to 10% return on investment in 3 to 5 years. That doesn't sound like trillions of dollars, does it, over decades? This is making real money in real time and doing battle with the other opportunities out there, like the latest web app, for investment dollars. And it has mass market potential because government is not the sole tenant. At best, it's the anchor tenant. It's the one that might, anchor the enterprise, like Digital Globe sells to the intelligence community, but they make a whole lot more money selling to everyday people through Google Earth and other sources.
And this investment criteria is actually a little bit more realistic for what venture capital maybe gets appraised out over time. This is a little bit lower than what it was during the dot-com era, but this is probably pretty realistic for a true risk capitalist situation and scenario.
At this point, it is both evolutionary and disruptive, depending on what the application is you're looking at it. But it's actually much more broadly based in many ways than what the web can deliver, because it's actual hardware, it's actual applications in a variety of different markets. And you know what? You may look at it, like that credit card example, it may not really seem to have anything directly to do with space. It may have just simply been derived at one time from space technology in order to benefit here, but we still claim it as space technology because that's where it started. Finally, think global. This is something where, because of space technology, either directly or indirectly, you can have an impact around the globe. This Beacon Biotechnology, in developing the little memory stick-sized diagnostic kit, can be programmed to detect mad cow disease, HIV, and you take it out to third world countries that don't have healthcare infrastructure, and immediately you've got diagnoses. You can control epidemics that way. Again, thank you to the space program.
And you've got global consumer companies like Starbucks thinking we need to start using that GPS constellation up there to allow our customers to opt in and say, yes, please alert me whenever I'm 100 yards within a Starbucks anywhere on the planet Earth, and come in for 50 cents off your coffee. So,
and also, too, when your friends are there, you can program it to tell you, oh, Fred's over here and Joan's over there, and they know where you are, and you all meet at that Starbucks.
Or if there's, at any time, if there's anybody on my Facebook or LinkedIn within 100 yards of each other and there's a certain amount of them together, I want to be alerted.
Automatic signal.
Because I know they're talking about me.
Sounds like a tweet. Okay, so we've taken another breath. Why Colorado? This is the most fun. Colorado. Why Colorado? Because it takes a village. There are 4 ingredients that you've got to have in order to grow new technology ventures. You need to have the idea people, the creatives. You need to have entrepreneurs, the people who know how to take those ideas and turn them into successful businesses. And by the way, they generally are not the same people. Okay? You need to have the investors, the people with the resources capable of catalyzing the good idea in the business strategy. And then you have to have the often ignored but just as important support professionals, like Townsend and Crew, by the way, who also is one of our sponsors. IP counsel, CPAs, risk managers, management consultants that help the company get to its milestones, make money, become profitable, and create economic prosperity and jobs. In Colorado, and particularly in the Front Range, we have all 4 of those ingredients at the critical mass. It's an overused analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. This is a sort of fertile territory, this creative soup that Silicon Valley had back in the late 80s and 90s that led to it being a household term right now. All within a 45-minute commute. Denver, over the past few years, has actually taken its rightful position with many cities on the coast in terms of having a robust investor community, sophisticated support professionals, a whole community of serial entrepreneurs, and certainly the creative types when it comes to aerospace. And in a way, Denver is better poised than Silicon Valley because the type of creatives it has a great deal in the way of web applications, but even more so in terms of aerospace. I think you heard it was announced a few months ago that Colorado eclipsed Texas in terms of the amount of aerospace employment. And that's actual employment, okay? The number of people.
Not just per capita.
Not just per capita, but actual people. Second only to California in terms of the number of people actually employed in aerospace. I come from Texas. I come from Austin, another kind of a mini Silicon Valley, and I can tell you, having lived there and seen that boom, that Colorado eclipsed Texas a long time ago when it comes to the type of creative type of aerospace employee that's necessary to grow an emerging commercial sector like what we're talking about in Space 2.0. Case in point, the employment in Texas in aerospace, 95% of it is in aero. It's not in space. And the 5% that remains in space is just concentrated around the Johnson Space Center south of downtown Houston. And even there, a lot of that employment is in terms of operations. It's not the engineers and the scientists that we have in abundance here in aerospace, proportionately.
And when it comes to those 4 special ingredients, no one's measured this out yet, but we may probably be number 1 with that, and maybe the 8th Continent Project will do that research. But no one's done that, but we're probably number 1 in the United States, if not the world, with those 4 key ingredients.
I will go on record to say that we are, because I have a resource here, found a quote. The Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation has ranked Colorado first out of the 50 states in the U.S. for private aerospace employment concentration. Okay. You don't have to be a math professor to know that Colorado has a smaller population than California. And so when you do the math, the per capita creative talent is far larger than it is in California, even though California has the area around LAX and Pasadena and up in the Bay Area.
And that's not probably, I don't think, Burke, they're not counting small companies like a Flake, who is not an aerospace company, but they're using the GPS system to apply it to a commercial market.
Yeah, generally speaking, that would be the Lockheeds and the Balls, and well, I don't know, Balls there, Boeing, and that kind of Space 1.0, or the subsystem developers, the 1.5s. Some of the new spaces out there, and there certainly is Space 2.0, but they're not counting that, okay? I'm not either. I'm just simply saying the Front Range has the raw ingredients just in the Space 1.0 and Space 1.5 communities to outstrip even California in terms of creative potential. Okay, so takes a village, and we have the market cornered in the United States on creativity. We also have lifestyle, and as you know from the Silicon Valley experience, lifestyle is really important. We do attract our share of garage and dorm room geniuses. And the nice thing about it is that space now is so accessible, you don't need to have a deep pocket to build and launch and operate a spacecraft in order to do stuff coming from space, to deal and make more value out of content coming from space systems and space-derived technology. We have superior academic and intellectual leadership in this town because of that. My institution, CU, CSU, I don't want to alienate anybody. We've got quite a academic community. Also career alternatives. We've reached the critical mass where if you move to Denver and you don't like who you're working for, chances are you can have several other places to choose from, much like Silicon Valley was for software engineers and IT specialists.
You really have to have that. You have to have that to call what's called a cluster, whether it's biotech or IT or aerospace. If you cannot be mobile in your career, then you're not there yet. And we're starting to be there with aerospace. We're there already with IT. San Diego's there with biotech, but we're not, that kind of a thing. And we're one of the few places where that mobility is starting to actually happen and be real.
And need I tell you about leisure and recreation in this state? Probably not. We're the second most fit state, and I don't know what the first most is. They must really be fit. But at any rate, that's the sort of a thing that brings the type of creative talent and keeps it in an area. Okay, and that's absolutely critical. If you want to read a little bit more about that, read The Rise of the Creative Class by Richard Florida. It's a very good book, and there are a couple of books since then too that talk about the importance of lifestyle and whatnot to keep creative types in your community.
Silicon Valley was one of the first places where that happened because back in the day, California even then was considered somewhat cool, and Colorado now is starting to take that on as well.
Those are Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Toronto. You can read it yourself. The Eighth Continent Project has contacts in each one of these cities right now. We are developing the same sort of programs in those cities. We're not as far along as we are in the Front Range, but with the idea of capitalizing on the four things that you need within a 45-minute commute, but then also capitalizing on the ability to network with other communities that have similar concentrations of resources.
Almost all those cities are bigger than Denver, and yet we probably have some of the best mix and clustering going on out of all of those.
Okay, and so I know it's on everybody's mind. What's Space 3.0 and beyond? I don't know. But I think that there is an analog with Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and Web 3.0, and it all has to do with just delivering more and more value in more and more ways to more and more people. So we'll leave it at that. Perhaps you can come up with better ideas than we can. Okay, so again, we kind of digressed. What is the Eighth Continent Project? How are we addressing this opportunity? How are we solidifying Denver's lead in this emerging commercial sector? Eighth Continent is networking, access to talent, knowledge, access to capital, and giving back. Let me explain each one of those. This is our comprehensive approach. 8C is networking. It links technologists, entrepreneurs, investors, the four groups that you need, with policy leaders and government. We have active social calendars. If you go to our website, you'll see a calendar section there where you can go in and find seminars, training, social events, other networking events. This program's on the calendar. And we're in LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. this month. I don't know where we'll be next month. It's evolving, but we're making every effort we can to take full advantage of social media and the power of it to accelerate the growth of Space 2.0 and also its ability to network with other Space 2.0 communities.
And we hope this becomes a little bit of networking on steroids, if you will, because usually when people network, they have similar interests or they're in a similar field. In this case, the labor capital and the venture capital that's going to come together probably in the past would never have crossed paths. They would never speak to each other, and that's why we're cross-cutting across so many different industries.
Eighth continent is access to talent. Mentioning the labor capital, peer-to-peer connections, mentoring and training, all very important within a community. We have a career center. You can go there. It's a two-sided portal, one for people looking for jobs, one for people looking for employees. You can register. We spread your name around. As it grows, your opportunities will grow either as an employer or as a prospective employee. We have a university internship program. We deal with all levels. We have interns at CU and Colorado School of Mines, Metro State, CCD, and we're expanding just here in the region for all types of jobs in the emerging Space 2.0 community, in the small entrepreneurial Space 1.5 community, and even, yes, in the Space 1.0 large employer community as well. We have a global campus network. The flagship club is at the Colorado School of Mines. We're being joined shortly by the MIT and other schools that actually have an interesting phenomenon. At MIT, it's called the Astropreneurs Club. Okay? It's a combination of MIT's outstanding Aero-Astro department and the Sloan School of Management. And they come together every year and enter our business plan competition. So we're taking advantage of that because they're the professionals of tomorrow as well.
One of our partners, too, is the Deming School here in University of Colorado with connecting the business with the science and the research side.
That's correct. And then workforce training, again, covering all types of labor needs, particularly in the current environment. The economic stimulus funding is an opportunity for us to firm up that part of the job scene, create and retain jobs as much as possible in this new emerging commercial sector. Eighth continent is knowledge. We do focused market intelligence trends analysis. We publish other people's works too in a sense of sharing a whole library of information with the idea of helping ventures and people who are interested in this gain more information about what is possible. We do specialized training and mentoring. We just finished a training program for people past startup, ventures past startup. They're looking at scaling up with technology companies. We did that jointly with the Metro Denver Small Business Development Center. And we have more on the way. We have, as you know, university interns, which we place out in the community. These are the people who know the latest from their college education they get here and go out into the workplace. New source of entry-level talent. We have a blog and we have a wiki. Blog is a stream of news and development and information, and we think you'll find it very useful. Go take a look at it. The wiki is kind of an experiment still in making. Has to do with the intersections of industries that you may be familiar with space. So for example, you'll see a page on agriculture in space, pharmaceuticals in space, music in space, okay? We have like 30 different pages that we're starting to articulate so that you can start seeing how space and more familiar industries interact and grow with one another. Eighth continent is access to capital. We have a funding network, business incubator, investment summits, and public and investor relations. Metzger Associates is our firm, and they've done a heck of a job of helping us get the word out.
We're also fortunate to have the Keiretsu Forum as one of our founding sponsors, and for the first time, angel-level investors are now investing in these types of technologies. Steve Murchie's here, who has started the local chapter. It's probably one of the strongest angel investing networks in the world, I believe. So very fortunate for us.
He will join us on the panel in a moment, along with Paul Jurdy of the Deming Center for Entrepreneurship at CU. And Eighth Continent is giving back. Social entrepreneurship, a sense of being part of the community. We do the university business plan competition to help train the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, to help train engineers who don't get the kind of training ordinarily in their college education, understanding what the larger context is within which they will practice their profession. STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, very important all through and up into college and graduate school. We have a STEM program. Mentioned workforce development before. We have a speakers bureau. If anybody would like for us to come speak, we have all kinds of ranges of talks to give to talk about Space 2.0. And we have a volunteer program as well, if you all would like to join in that way or as members. So in closing, raise your star over the Eighth Continent. Here's how. Visit our website. That's our blog, and you can also access that from our website. And that's my email address. And I invite you to contact us in whatever way you want to, if it interests you, and we'll connect you with our network and take you where your interests want to go. And so, finally, why the Star Trek episode? Hopefully that hasn't been, our presentation has not been in a language you didn't understand. What we're attempting to do here is to bridge a cultural chasm, if you will, where people grew up thinking of NASA and space travel as being one thing and one thing only. It's kind of hard to break that mold. We're trying to do that to better recognize and realize the potential of that dividend coming out of 5 and 6 decades of investment. And hope you see a part of yourself in it as well. Thank you.